Most folks in the town of Red Willow still talk about the day young Eli Mercer rode into the livestock yards with nothing in his pockets but 150 cents and a conscience. Too big for his own good. He hadn't planned on buying anything. He wasn't even supposed to be there. But when he spotted 3 trembling fillies penned off to the side, ribs showing, heads lowered like they'd already given up, something in him shifted. These weren't the kind of horses ranchers fought over. They were the kind folks walked past without a second glance. Except Eli didn't walk past. He paid what little he had, more out of pity than reason. Nobody laughed louder than the traders that day. Nobody expected those tiny, fragile creatures to survive another week. And certainly, no one imagined the weakest among them, a filly barely taller than Eli's waist, would carry a truth powerful enough to shake the entire valley. So what was hidden beneath her frail frame? And how did a simple act of mercy turn into the most talked about story in the West? If you love true Western heartwarmers, mysteries from the frontier, and stories that feel like they walked straight out of the dust and into your imagination, make sure to like this video, subscribe to WestTales A Down, and share it with someone who enjoys a good tale around the fire. It helps more than you know. The sun hung low over Red Willow that morning, the kind of pale orange that made dust look like gold swirling in the air. The livestock yards were already waking up with the usual noise. Cattle lowing, traders barking prices, the sharp clang of iron gates, and the occasional burst of laughter from men who thought they had the world figured out. Most days, those yards felt like a battleground made of sweat, money, and instinct. But on this particular morning, tucked behind the main pens where the real business happened, something quieter was unfolding. Eli Mercer had no intention of being part of it. He'd ridden into town with nothing more pressing on his mind than picking up fencing nails and a bag of grain. His ranch sat over the ridge, small enough to be overlooked, but sturdy enough to keep him busy. He didn't own much, and he wasn't the kind of man who complained about it. Folks around town knew Eli as the young rancher with more heart than resources, more grit than luck. He was steady, quiet, not the type who spent money he didn't have, which is exactly why no one understood what came over him when he saw those fillies. They were penned off at the far corner, so far from the noise that it almost felt like the auctioneers were trying to pretend they weren't there. 3 tiny, underfed creatures stood shoulder to shoulder, shivering even though the air wasn't cold. There was something about them that didn't fit the usual livestock scene. They looked too young to be weaned, too fragile to travel, too defeated to protest their fate. The first filly was Chestnut, a dull shade that might have shone beautifully if she'd ever known proper care. The second was a lanky bay, all long legs and sharp bones, like she'd grown faster than her body could keep up. And then there was the third Dot, the smallest. She was the kind of small that made your breath catch for a moment. Not a cute small, a concerning small. Her coat, a pale cream under layers of dirt, hung loose around her frame. Her eyes, big and dark, carried a depth that didn't match her body. You couldn't quite explain it, but there was something in the way she lifted her head, steady and almost aware. Eli leaned on the rail, studying them. He didn't know why. There were dozens of healthier horses being paraded around just yards away, but his attention stayed rooted to this neglected trio. Interesting, ain't they? A rough voice said behind him that Eli turned to find Hank Dooler, a trader known for profit over sentiment, scratching his beard as he watched Eli with mild amusement. They look half-starved, Eli said. Hank shrugged. Came in with a batch from over the canyon. No labels, no markers, no history. Just trouble, far as I can tell. Nobody wants him. Eli looked back at the smallest filly. She blinked at him slowly, like she was trying to figure him out. Or maybe she was just trying to stay awake. Hard to tell. They're selling? Eli asked. Hank laughed, but it wasn't unkind. More like he couldn't resist the absurdity of it. If you can call it selling. Folks would pay more for a sack of old nails. Something tugged at Eli's chest then. Maybe it was pity, maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was something far quieter, something he didn't yet recognize, but he felt it clearly. The idea of leaving those fillies there didn't sit right with him. How much? Eli asked. Hank raised an eyebrow. For all three? 150 cents, if you don't mind wasting it. Eli didn't hesitate. Maybe he should have. Maybe logic should have stepped in and reminded him of the nails and grain he still needed to buy. But logic didn't stand a chance in that moment. I'll take them, he said. Hank blinked. You serious? Eli nodded, already reaching for the coins in his pocket. They weren't much, but they were everything he had set aside for supplies. The coins clinked into Hank's hand, and the sound carried more weight than their value. Well, Hank muttered, shaking his head. Never thought I'd see the day. Word spread fast. By the time Eli walked the fillies toward the loading corral, a few ranchers had already gathered, whispering and chuckling. The general consensus was clear. Eli had made a foolish purchase. A sentimental one, a doomed one. But Eli didn't care. Not in that moment. Dot up close. The fillies looked even worse. Their hooves were chipped, their ribs sharp, their coats tangled. Still, they moved toward him with a strange trust, as if they knew he wasn't like the others, but the smallest filly. She hesitated. She stayed back, watching him with those deep, unreadable eyes. There was something about her gaze that made Eli pause. It wasn't fear. It wasn't submission. It was almost intentional, as if she were measuring him the way a seasoned rancher might assess a stranger wandering onto his property. You're a quiet one, Eli murmured, taking a slow step toward her. She didn't flinch, didn't move at all. She simply stood there, studying him with a steadiness that didn't match her frail form. Then, after what felt like a silent negotiation between them, she walked forward and pressed her nose gently against his hand. Dot lay, felt something shift inside him, a subtle certainty, a moment of connection that didn't make sense yet. Your seaman home, he whispered.
He loaded them carefully, making sure not to rush the smallest filly. Even as other ranchers chuckled under their breath, Eli kept his focus on her. It was hard to explain, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this little creature, something quietly waiting. As he tightened the straps on the wagon, old Sheriff Merton strolled over, thumbs tucked into his belt. Eli, the sheriff drawled, I've seen some impulsive buys in my time, but this one might take the biscuit. Eli managed a small smile. Maybe, but they deserve a chance. Merton nodded slowly. Just be careful. Horses without a history, sometimes there's a reason. Eli looked at the smallest filly again. She'd settled near the front of the wagon, her eyes scanning the yard like she was memorizing every face, every sound, every exit. Yeah, Eli said quietly. I'll keep that in mind. As Eli climbed onto his wagon and flicked the reins, he couldn't shake the feeling tugging at him. The filly's eyes, the way she moved, the sense that something about her didn't match the picture. He didn't know it yet, but he just brought home the biggest mystery Red Willow had seen in years. And the smallest filly was carrying a truth that would soon shake the whole valley. The road from Red Willow to Eli Mercer's ranch wasn't long, but with 3 fragile fillies swaying in the back of the wagon, it felt like a journey across half the frontier. The wheels creaked over ruts and dry patches. The horses pulling the wagon moved at a careful pace, and every so often Eli glanced back to make sure the smallest filly was still standing. She seemed steadier than she had any right to be. Her legs were thin, her coat patchy, but her posture had changed, almost as if she understood she was being carried toward a second chance. Eli's ranch came into view just as the late afternoon sun began softening into a tired gold. The place was modest, a weather-beaten house, a small barn, a lean-to that pretended to be a shed, and fencing that had seen better decades. What it lacked in grandeur, it made up for in stubborn endurance. Much like Eli himself, As he pulled up to the main gate, he hopped off the wagon and swung the gate wide. The Fillies watched him with that same strange trust that had surprised him back at the auction. The two bigger ones made small, nervous sounds, but the smallest stayed silent, observing everything with careful attention. "Welcome home," Eli murmured. He led them toward the barn, walking slowly so they wouldn't panic. The chestnut filly stumbled once. The bay filly kept bumping into her, but the smallest one, she walked with her head held slightly higher. Weak, but purposeful. Inside, the barn smelled of old hay and quiet evenings. Eli cleared a small section, spreading fresh straw and filling a trough with water. He'd have to stretch his supplies thin until his next trip into town, but he'd already decided he'd make it work. He untied the fillies one by one. The chestnut drank deeply. The bay lay down immediately, as if relieved to find stillness. But the smallest filly wandered the barn's perimeter, nose close to the ground, inspecting every post, every beam, every shadow. "Curious little thing," Eli said softly. He crouched near her, holding out a handful of grain. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping close and eating gently from his palm. Her eyes, in the dim barn light, looked older than her body suggested. Thoughtful, almost calculating. It struck Eli as strange, but he didn't question it. Not yet. That evening, after settling the fillies, Eli stepped onto the porch with a cup of weak coffee and watched the sky darken over the ridge. Coyotes yipped in the distance. The familiar sounds of the ranch should have relaxed him, but his mind kept returning to the smallest filly. There was something about her presence that tugged at him. He'd seen neglected horses before, plenty of them, but he'd never seen one so aware, so alert. Horses that weak usually trembled or hid in the herd on instinct. This filly did neither. Instead, she seemed to be listening. The next morning came early. The ranch woke with its usual list of chores: feeding the cattle, checking the fences, filling water troughs. Eli worked quickly but kept drifting back toward the barn. Every time he peeked in, the smallest filly was standing near the door, waiting for him. By noon, Eli made a simple decision. He needed to see how weak they truly were. He opened the barn doors and let the fillies step into the small corral. The chestnut moved stiffly, unsure. The bay stumbled again, but caught herself. And the smallest, she stepped out calmly, blinking at the morning sunlight. She turned her head in slow arcs, as if cataloging every tree, every bird call, every distant rustle. Then she looked at Eli, holding his gaze in a way that felt deliberate. "You're something else," he whispered. He walked her a few steps, guiding her gently with a loose rope. To his surprise, she didn't drag her feet or lean on him for balance. She walked with surprising steadiness. Not strength, just steadiness, as if her body had adapted to weakness long ago and learned to move with it rather than fight it. But there was something else, something barely perceptible. A small scar ran down her left shoulder. Thin, healed long ago, but unmistakably man-made. A mark. Eli froze. Whoever said these fillies had no history either hadn't looked closely or had decided not to say anything. "Where'd you come from, girl?" he murmured, brushing the scar with his thumb. The filly lowered her head slightly, not in pain, but almost like she accepted the question. As the day went on, Eli tried to focus on his chores, but his mind circled back to that scar. Horses didn't just end up in anonymous auctions by accident. Someone had owned her. Someone had marked her intentionally, and someone had allowed her to fall into that terrible condition. That evening, while tending to the fillies again, Eli noticed another peculiar behavior. The smallest one didn't eat like the others. She took her time. Instead of diving into the feed, she sniffed it, inspected it, and only then began chewing. Cautious, aware, almost trained. He rubbed his forehead, trying to shake off the sense of strangeness building inside him. Later that night, as a lantern flickered on the barn wall, Eli stood quietly near the filly's stall. The smallest one approached him unprompted. She pressed her head gently against his chest, the softest gesture of trust. "You're a fighter," Eli whispered. "But there's more to you, ain't there?" Her ears twitched at his voice, and for a moment, Eli felt a certainty he couldn't yet explain. This filly had belonged to someone important. Someone careful. Someone who hadn't meant for her to end up discarded. And that meant one thing. Whoever that was, they might still be looking for her. But that realization didn't hit Eli fully until the next morning. He'd ridden out early to check the cattle along the north pasture. When he returned, he noticed something unusual. Tracks near the barn gate. Boot prints. Deep ones. Someone had come onto his property while he was gone. And not from the road. They'd approached from the tree line. Eli's stomach tightened. Red Willow wasn't the kind of place where folks trespassed without reason. There had been no knocks on his door. No attempts to make their presence known. Someone had come quietly, looked around, then left just as quietly. He followed the tracks until they disappeared toward the creek. Then he hurried back to the barn. The fillies were still there. But the smallest filly, she was standing in the exact center of the stall, staring toward the open doorway. Her expression was different. Her ears were rigid, her body tense, her gaze locked onto something only she seemed to sense. Eli stepped into her line of sight. "What's wrong?" he asked. She didn't look at him. Not right away. Instead, her gaze drifted back to the empty doorway, as if expecting someone to return. Someone who might have been there before. Someone who knew exactly who she was. Eli exhaled slowly. Maybe Sheriff Merton was right. Horses without a history sometimes carried a reason. And this filly, she certainly had one. The night after Eli discovered those mysterious boot prints, sleep refused to settle anywhere near him. He lay awake listening to every creak of the old house, every distant coyote howl, every brush of wind across the siding. His mind replayed the same questions over and over. Who had come to the ranch? What were they looking for? And why had the smallest filly acted like she recognized the presence of someone unseen? By dawn, he'd made up his mind. He needed answers. The sun was still low when he walked into the barn. The fillies stirred sleepily, stretching and shifting in the soft straw. The chestnut nickered softly. The bay yawned, long and loud. But the smallest, she watched him intently, her eyes following every movement he made. There was no fear in her gaze, just deep, deliberate awareness. Eli knelt beside her, running a gentle hand down her neck. "I don't know who you belong to," he murmured, "but someone's looking for you. And whoever they are, I ain't about to let them take you without a reason." The filly blinked slowly, almost as if acknowledging his promise. He tightened his coat and stepped outside. The early light washed across the land, revealing the faintest remnants of the boot prints from the day before. He followed the trail again, this time with sharper attention. The prints were heavy, spaced evenly, and pointed toward the creek. Whoever was had moved with purpose, not curiosity. The creek banks were damp from last night's dew, making it easier to spot where the stranger had crossed. On the far side, the tracks disappeared into the thicket. Eli stood there for a long moment, staring into the trees. Someone had come looking, but for what? The fillies? The smallest one? Or something else entirely? The uncertainty gnawed at him. He headed back toward the ranch, mind working through possibilities. Maybe a cattle rustler scouting. Maybe a ranch hand passing through. But his instincts dismissed those options. Rustlers didn't move that quietly, and ranch hands didn't sneak in from the trees. When Eli reached the barn again, the smallest filly was standing at the gate, waiting for him. It was becoming a pattern and a strange comfort. "You're not ordinary," he said softly, "and I think you know that." He guided her into the small corral for another walk. As she stepped into the morning light, the faint scar on her shoulder glimmered just enough for him to examine it again. Thin, precise, done with a practiced hand. Not an accident, not a wound from the wild. It looked like a brand mark, except it wasn't shaped like any brand Eli recognized. It was too clean, too deliberate, more like a symbol than a ranch mark, a mark meant for identification. He hesitated, the realization settling deeper in his thoughts. "You belong to someone important," he murmured. The filly lifted her head toward him, as if confirming it. He looked around the yard, scanning for any sign of movement. The trees were still, the fence line quiet, but that uneasy feeling stayed with him. He needed more information than guesses. There was one man in Red Willow who had seen more ranch brands, symbols, and markings than anyone else. Old Caleb Branton, the retired horse trader who lived behind the general store. Caleb knew histories, good ones, bad ones, forgotten ones. If anyone could identify that mark, it would be him. Eli made his decision. Before leaving, he secured the barn, gave the fillies fresh water, and lingered for a moment by the smallest one. She pressed her forehead gently against his arm, and something about it hit him with unexpected weight. "I'll be back," he whispered. Her ears twitched, but she didn't look afraid, almost as if she trusted him. Eli saddled his mare and rode into town, the morning air crisp and filled with the scent of dry grass. Red Willow looked the same as always. Quiet streets, wooden storefronts, the saloon already clattering with early drinkers. But Eli wasn't here for chatter. He stopped at Caleb Brandon's small porch and knocked. After a long pause, the old trader shuffled out, squinting at the sun and then at Eli. "Well, if it ain't the boy with the 3 pitty ponies," Caleb rasped. Eli tried not to smile. "I need your eyes on something." Caleb motioned him in. His house was cluttered with old tack equipment, harnesses, papers, and a surprising number of horse sketches pinned to the walls. Caleb gestured to a chair, but Eli remained standing. "What's got you looking like you found a rattlesnake in your boots?" Caleb asked. Eli pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat. He'd sketched the scar last night, the shape, length, and slight curve. He handed it to Caleb. The old trader took his time studying it. At first, his expression was passive. Then it shifted. His eyes narrowed. His jaw tightened ever so slightly. "You sure this is accurate?" Caleb asked quietly. "Yes." Caleb set the paper down with unusual care. "Where do you see it?" "On the smallest filly I bought yesterday." Caleb leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Eli, that ain't no ranch brand. That's a registry mark." "A what?" "A mark used by hybrid horse breeders to track lineage. Not local ones. Big ones. Private ones. The kind who breed specialized stock." Eli frowned. Why would a breeder let a filly like that end up in an anonymous auction? Caleb shook his head. They wouldn't. Not willingly. Silence settled. Eli felt something cold creep into his stomach. "So she's valuable. Not just valuable. Important. That symbol belongs to a breeder known for training horses for long-distance tracking, messenger work, specialized frontier tasks. That filly wasn't born to be a farm horse. She was bred for purpose. A purpose. The word stuck with him. Caleb picked up the paper again. "Eli, if someone marked her, someone's expecting her. And if she went missing, someone might already be looking." Eli thought of the boot prints, the way the filly had stared toward the door, the strange, quiet intelligence in her eyes. "Caleb," Eli said quietly, "does this mark belong to anyone dangerous?" The old man hesitated, and that hesitation was louder than any answer he could have spoken. "I ain't sure," he finally said, "but if she was part of one of their breeding lines, then whoever lost her isn't someone you want showing up at your ranch." Eli stood still, the weight of that truth settling over him like a heavy coat. He thanked Caleb and stepped outside, the morning suddenly feeling sharper, less welcoming. As he mounted his horse, he scanned the rooftops, the alleys, the distant hills. Everything looked normal, but now he knew better. Someone out there knew exactly what that filly represented, and they weren't finished searching for her. The ride home was tense. Every sound felt like a signal, every rustle a warning. When the ranch finally came into view, Eli's heart lifted and then sank. The barn door was open. He hadn't left it that way. He galloped forward, sliding off the saddle before the horse even stopped moving. He stormed in the barn, breath tight, fists clenched. The fillies were still there, but the smallest one stood exactly where she'd stood the day before. Center of the stall, rigid, alert, staring toward the open door. Someone had come again. Someone who knew she was here. And next time, they might not leave without her. Dawn cracked open over the sandstone arches like a blade drawn from its sheath, sharp and glinting. The desert held its breath. Even the wind, usually whispering across the ridges, stayed still. Men swore they could feel the moment shift, as if the world itself braced for what would happen when Cade Mercer rode out for the last time. 3 months had passed since Cade, Nora, and the stallion Onyx slipped out of Dustwater Ridge, leaving behind burning wagons, broken gunmen, and the memory of a night when several lives had been rewired. Cade's face still carried the faint shadow of that firelight, a look forged from danger and decision. He'd become something half mythical in the borderlands. The outlaw who wasn't an outlaw, the rider who sidestepped death as if it were no more threatening than dust on his boots. But legends draw attention, and not always the good kind. The Black Mesa Company had rebuilt its force. They wanted its land back. More than that, they wanted to crush any man who had made fools of them. Now, a full regiment of hired guns rode under the company banner, disciplined, uniformed, and lethal. They weren't looking to negotiate. They weren't looking to arrest. They were riding to erase. Cade knew the fight would find him eventually. He also knew Dustwater Ridge was next in line. He tightened the cinch on Onyx's saddle and scanned the horizon. The stallion shifted under him, already reading the change in the air. Nora stepped out from the old mission house, a rifle slung over her shoulder. Her eyes carried the same stubborn clarity he admired from the day they met. "They'll hit Dustwater by midday," Cade said, "and they'll bring enough firepower to flatten the whole ridge." Nora nodded, jaw set. "Then we meet them on open ground. Keep them off the town. Keep the families safe. You ready for that?" She smirked. "I was ready 3 months ago. You were the one who still needed convincing." Cade let the corner of his mouth lift. She wasn't wrong. They rode out side by side toward the plain where red earth stretched uninterrupted for nearly 6 miles. Cade wanted visibility. He wanted the company riders to see him standing there waiting. Sometimes the strongest weapon wasn't the gun in a man's hand, but his willingness to stand in plain sight of danger and not flinch. The first riders of the Black Mesa Force crested the rise just before noon. Sunlight flashed on metal buckles, rifle barrels, polished boots. At their center rode Graham Lattimore, the executive who turned the company from a mining outfit into a private army. He had the posture of a man who believed the law was a tool he owned, something he could bend until it fit the shape of profit. He raised a hand, signaling his riders to stop. "Mercer," he called, voice carrying across the open expanse. "You're alone. Brave or foolish, I can't tell. Either way, this ends today." Cade eased Onyx forward. "You're right about the ending, but you're wrong about who's alone." As if cued by the earth itself, riders emerged from behind the ridges. Dustwater farmers, ranch hands, miners, and drifters who'd taken shelter in the small town when the company pushed them off their own lands. They weren't soldiers, but they were angry. More important, they knew they had something worth fighting for. Nora rode at their front, rifle raised. 50 riders strong. The company regiment tensed. Lattimore scowled. "You think a handful of townsfolk are going to stop us?" "No," Cade said, "but I think they'll make you bleed for every inch you take. And I don't think your investors want to see that in the newspapers." Lattimore flicked his wrist. "I don't answer to newspapers." "No," Cade replied, "but you answer to fear." He leaned forward slightly, placing a gloved hand on Onyx's neck. The stallion's muscles bunched, ready, reading Cade's intent. "This is your last chance to turn around," Cade called, "or we settle it another way." Lattimore drew his pistol. The moment ruptured. Cade kicked hard, and Onyx launched into motion like a thunderbolt. Bullets cracked, dust burst, riders shouted. Cade felt the world narrow to a single bright thread. Movement, breath, timing. Onyx weaved through fire with supernatural certainty, each stride carrying them closer to the company line. Nora's rifle opened from the flank, her riders following in disciplined waves. They struck fast, then broke off, forcing the regiment to constantly reorient. Cade drove straight into the heart of their formation, using speed as both shield and weapon. He vaulted from the saddle onto a company rider, knocked him clean off his horse, rolled, came up firing. The world became noise and motion. Sand bit his skin. Horses screamed. Men cursed. Cade felt the close rush of death more than once. But each time Onyx was there, disrupting the angle, pulling fire, shielding Cade with the precision of something far more intelligent than mere instinct. The skirmish lasted 20 minutes, but felt like a lifetime. Then Lattimore, seeing the tide turning, tried to break for the rear. Cade sprinted, vaulted back onto Onyx without breaking stride, and pursued. The stallion closed the gap effortlessly. Cade drew level with Lattimore's horse. "Pull up," Cade warned. "Never," Lattimore snarled. He fired point blank. Onyx reared, kicking sideways, the bullet scraping Cade's coat instead of piercing his chest. Cade grabbed Lattimore's arm, twisted, and dragged him out of the saddle. The man hit the dirt hard. Cade stood over him. "It's over." "It's never over," Lattimore hissed. "Men like me build the world. Men like you just ride through it." Cade holstered his gun. "That's the problem," he said quietly. "You think this land belongs to you." Lattimore spat dust. "You won't kill me." "No," Cade said, "but the courts will. And now the whole territory knows what you brought here today." Nora and the riders closed in, securing the remaining company gunmen. Some fled, others surrendered. The desert finally let the wind return, sweeping through the battlefield, erasing the sharp edges of chaos. Cade looked across the horizon, where heat shimmered like a silver mirage. Dustwater Ridge stood untouched, alive, safe. He swung onto Onyx's back. Nora approached. "You're leaving," she said, reading his posture immediately. "For a while," Cade admitted. "Ridge is safe, but there's more like Lattimore. More places where someone thinks power means taking what ain't theirs." Nora exhaled steady. "Then I'll see you again. Count on it." Cade touched the brim of his hat. Onyx pawed the earth, ready to run. The horizon opened in every direction. Cade Mercer chose the one that looked most in need of a rider who wouldn't back down. And so the legend didn't end. It simply rode forward, kicking dust into the sunrise.